This is a fun little title we have here, a play on words. Asian visibility, leading while everyone is watching. And the three of us got together a little bit last night and got to know each other and threw a couple questions out, and we thought, let's just have a conversation. It might be a nice way to wrap up. By way of introduction, just for myself, I don't know why I'm up here. Partially, maybe, I was the moderator for the General Assembly in the Presbyterian Church in America. An Asian American came up to me in 2017 when I got elected, and he said, "You're like the Jeremy Lin of our denomination." And you all understand the reference, right? Owen had talked about JV versus varsity. And I have the pleasure of sitting here with the NBA. This is next level. I mean, literally Lin Sanity with InterVarsity. And then we got Kim Sanity with TGC. So Lin Sanity, Kim Sanity, very cool. We're gonna have a fun conversation. So let's get right into it. Maybe you can share a little bit about your journey. You're with InterVarsity, you're with TGC, and maybe you can talk how long you've been with the organization, and to the extent that you're aware, how did you end up where you are? Oh, and no patent Christian answers, right? Oh, it's the Lord led me here. We all know that.
God called me.
Yeah, God called me, yeah, okay.
Well, I'll start with the Linsanity story, maybe, actually. Yeah. You know, during that period, I can't tell you how many times I boarded an airplane and they said, you Jeremy Lin's brother? What? Are you related? I'm like, my last name's Lin. What's that? You know, but she was a student in our ministry at the time, so we do a lot of play around the Linsanity stuff. So yeah, but I don't know him at all, so that's okay. That's okay. I take credit. So my journey, really, as I shared earlier, I shared some of my story. I think, how did I end up here? Not by way of a plan at all. You know, I talk to Gen Z, millennials these days, and it's interesting the questions they ask. You know, I get people come up to me and they're like, how do I become president of our organization? And I'm like, I never asked that question ever before, you know? Like, and for me, it was very much following the Lord's leading, whatever that thing, you know, go sell everything, follow him. And what is the Lord leading me to for this period of time? And so it was step by step. And so for me, the Lord did use InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, a campus ministry, during my college student days. I fell in love with ministry. I loved ministering to other students as a student. I led Bible studies. I shared the gospel. Eventually led our fellowship, and it was actually a multi-ethnic fellowship, so I didn't know I'd end up in Asian American ministry. We had a great group, about 220 students, a really vibrant group, and I loved leading. And so when I was graduating, I was like, what else would I rather do with my time than do what I'm doing now, but not have to take classes, you know? And so I was like, let's do it, you know? So I could stay in school forever. So I went into ministry, and we actually then eventually planted an Asian American ministry at Harvard, and that's the Lord did start leading towards the Asian American side. And then actually a different route I took after about 5 years of ministry. With my wife and I, we were talking about, I think we'll have a period before we're going to go overseas. I mentioned we're going to go overseas to Mongolia. We didn't know it was Mongolia at the time. But I felt like since we had a few years in between, because we got to prepare and all that, I needed some marketplace experience. So I actually worked in the marketplace in the Bay Area for a few years. And then my wife and I moved to Mongolia, and it was very much planting work. So just like you do church planting, some of you were planting work, starting from scratch. And but it eventually evolved into directing a country movement. So directing the movement in the country. And I realized as things went on there, I really enjoyed organizational leadership. So it was a small group. I probably directed about 15 staff or so at the time. It wasn't a whole lot of staff, but the complexities of leading a movement in a country. So when I came back to the States, again, step by step, the Lord put me in a role where I was directing a region. So maybe I had about 60 staff, 60 employees underneath me, and overseeing the Mongolia of the U.S. So that's why I moved there. I had about 5 states that I was overseeing our ministry in. And then an invitation came to direct the Urbana Student Missions Conference, so to become a vice president for our organization, and that was a different step. So then I was suddenly supervising finance, administrative functions, and operations as well as staff, and then as part of the executive team, I started working on for about 5 or 6 years. So step by step. So it wasn't like, a traditional path to be president, or I didn't map it out, but the Lord led each step of the way. And in 2016, I started serving as president of InterVarsity. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. How about you, Julius?
Yeah, my story is similar in that I would have never expected to be where I am today. I think even at an early age, I knew I wanted to serve the Lord. Wasn't sure exactly in what capacity. And so by the time I was in Bible college, I thought I would go the traditional route, become a pastor and do that. And then by the time I got into seminary, my wife and I were married, we actually started praying for missions. So we were actually in the same kind of track, thinking that the Lord might use us, especially in areas that just didn't have enough kind of leadership training. So I really had a heart to be part of a missions movement, training the next generation of leaders. And then in God's providence, I went to go do my doctorate, and then during that time, still planning on going overseas. And then I got a call from my alma mater when I went to Westminster Seminary, California, and they were looking for a professor. And so I was young, I was 32 years old. I didn't have a lot of experience, but somehow the professors there, my former professors, thought that they might take a chance on a young guy. And so we prayed about it, and my mentor at the time was Ed Clowney, also involved with InterVarsity in Urbana for many years. And so I was really torn because I really felt God calling me to go overseas. And I really had that kind of burden in my heart, and that was kind of the direction we were going. And so Ed Clowney, in his in an inimitable way, just basically said, well, what would you do overseas? Well, I want to help plant churches and train leaders and just be a good pastor. He said, why can't you do that here? You could do that here, but train global leaders from here. As long as you have that kind of global mindset and a missional mindset, you can do that anywhere. So I didn't think about that. I thought you had to cross a big body of water to be a true missionary. He said, no, you can be a missionary right where you are. And so that was really helpful to me. And so that kind of launched the next 20 years of teaching at the seminary, which has been wonderful. And then again, I reached kind of the 20-year mark in the summer of 2019. And I remember sitting with Jihi, and something that Jihi and I do all the time is we kind of take some time just kind of do spiritual inventory of kind of where we are, where our kids are, and are we doing what the Lord is calling us to do. And that particular summer in July of 2019, after 20 years, I thought, wow, I didn't think I would be doing this for this long. I honestly didn't. But the Lord had been so faithful. I said, okay, Lord, what do you want us to do for the next 20? And I really felt that the Lord was saying, do it another 20 years. Just keep doing what you're doing and be faithful. Just be faithful and bloom where you're planted, right? And so wherever the Lord plants you, you try to bear fruit. So I said, okay, I'll give another 20 years at the seminary. Little town called Escondido, California, right? And then literally 2 weeks after that kind of peaceful kind of decision or confirmation that I thought, the Lord, this is what the Lord wants, I get a call and saying, hey, we're part of the search committee for TGC. Don Carson is retiring, and we'd love for you to apply for this role. And then prayed. Jihi and I prayed for 2 weeks along with my senior pastor and my dad. Anytime there's a major decision, we always call kind of the spiritual advisors in my life, and let's pray together for 2 weeks, discern God's will. And at first it was a definite no. Honestly, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I really feel 20 more years of being a professor. And then the more I started to pray, and I think this happens, right? The more you pray, the more of a burden you feel, right? And so I prayed, I'm like, Lord, I don't want this burden. I don't want to be burdened by this. And I really think I finally have reached the point in my career where I think I know what I'm doing now. 20 years of doing the same thing. I feel really comfortable.
Almost mail it in.
Yeah, I could put it in kind of cruise control or in my car, autopilot, right? Yes. I could put it in autopilot and just kind of cruise along. And I think the Lord was like, no, ministry is not about autopilot. That's good. Oof. It's like, you need to continue to be challenged and do something different. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. And so that's when the burden started growing deeper and deeper. And then when I talked to my wife, my pastor, my parents, and they're like, I think you need to apply. Because even in the application process of going through that, filling out questionnaires, going through the interview process, you actually learn a lot about kind of where you are in life and the unique gifts and skills that God has given to you by that point in your life, the unique opportunities, and you try to see if all of that aligns. To bring your history, your skills, your experiences, as well as the opportunity. And it seems like everything was just aligning. It's like, oh my. So could it be that all the things that I've done up to this point was leading me to this, but I don't want to do it? And then at that point, you're just like, I think I better obey. Because the last time I disobeyed, it didn't go too well. And so, then the process just moved really quickly in that summer, and then started 2 years ago, 1 month before the pandemic.
So it's been 2 years, but it feels like 20.
It really is.
With the
It's
pandemic,
the
that'll end.
pandemic years are like dog years,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
1 year felt like 7.
And Julius, you talked about your father as being part of this process, and I just feel like this sort of juxtaposition to, Tom, what you shared about when you said you're going to go into ministry and how your mother reacted. So, we're old men now, so we can just speak freely, I hope. How's that going? Have you reconciled with your mom? Where are you guys?
Yeah, I did. I didn't share the full story because I think just to recognize that it doesn't always end up this way. You don't always get to reconcile. I know ministry friends who have paid the cost of their families and never reconciled, in their entire lives. But I was lucky. So my mom actually was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer a long time ago, and when we weren't speaking. And God used the cancer to help her reflect on her life. She had kind of sworn off church and just cut off from me. But through the cancer, she opened me back into her life again. And so during the year she had stage 4 cancer, I was able to visit her some more. And then when she finally went into hospice care, she invited me home to spend time with her. And we reconciled. She invited me over. I'll never forget. She took my hand one evening and she started crying. And she said, "Tom, I'm so sorry for all the pain I've caused you. Will you forgive me?" Can you imagine an Asian mother saying that to you? I mean, she asked for my forgiveness, and first generation, and I said, yeah, of course I forgive you. And we reconciled that night. Then the day after, actually, my dad calls me down. I'm home. This is like Christmas time. I'm home, and we kind of used to have this annual, like, let's talk about your future talk. I don't know if you're young adults, that happened to you, right? So what are you really doing with your life, And so he calls me down, and he says, I want to talk to you. And Nancy was there, too. I want to talk to you. And I thought, we're going to have another one of these talks. And he actually surprised me. He said, "Tom, actually, what I want to tell you is all my dreams have come true as I've immigrated to this country. Wow. And all I want is for your dreams to come true, too." And I couldn't believe it. He said, all my dreams I have a family that I love, I have this, we've got a home, blah, 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 because he came to the U.S. with nothing. So all I want is for your dreams to come true. So if God is calling you to Mongolia, then you should go. He said, I'll take care of Mom, don't worry. I'll be fine. You remember, she's on her hospice care. We don't know what's going to happen, and he's going to be widowed. And he said, don't worry about me. You should go. And so we reconciled as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful story.
I'm wrecked right now. Why did I ask that question? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, similar stories. We went to Cambodia for 3 years. We were talking about this, and my mom, who's, doesn't really profess her faith, but she said something really interesting. She said, yeah, you're a Christian. That naturally, that's what you're going to end up doing. Like, if you're serious about your faith, then of course you're going to do this. And it was hearing it from like a non-believing mother to say, yeah, if you Christians are really about your faith, then you'll do these crazy things. So yeah, go do what you're supposed to do. It was really interesting, yeah, her perspective on it. All right, I got to change subjects a little bit. Okay. You had talked about the, for lack of a better word, the where are you from moment, yes. Right? And I think we all have them. So I want to ask Julius, do you have a funny where are you from moment? I'll give you a second to think about it. I have an entire answer tree when people ask me, right? I'm at the airport especially, and we got a lot of time waiting in line or whatever, so where are you from? You get there eventually, and I say, Korea, and they say north or south. The answer is always north. And so when they say, oh, no, I didn't think you, then why'd you ask me that question? You know better. But if they don't, then we go for another ride. And then I say, yeah, no, I'm free. I can go anywhere. We have our Disneyland and all this stuff. And then, hopefully by then it's time to board. But Julius, do you have a story?
How do I top that? Yeah. I have many stories. As you know, I minister in the Presbyterian Church in America, the PCA, and the history of that particular denomination is primarily in the South and the Southeast. And one of the great privileges I have is getting to preach at many of my former students' ordination services. And so it's one of the best things I get to do, is to walk them through their seminary journey, to see them grow and mature, and then to actually go to their ordination, preach, and lay my hands and be a part of this special moment of consecrating this man of God for the Lord's service. To me, that's like one of the highlights of my ministry and my life. And so as a result, I actually go to the South a lot, to the Southeast. And you can imagine how the conversations go. So even after I'm done preaching, right? So even after I'm done preaching, I used to greet people in the back in many of these southern churches. Very, very, very hospitable, don't get me wrong. Very lovely people, bless your heart kind of people, But it's amazing how many people ask where I learned English. And why my English is so good. Yeah. Even after hearing me preach for all that time. And so, I get that a lot, but I don't have an answer tree.
I'll give you mine.
Okay, yeah.
I say Rosetta Stone. How long have you been there? 6 months. I am a walking advertisement. 6 months, I picked it all up.
I just don't have that kind of boldness. Yeah. These are dear ladies of the church, right? Dear ladies of the church with their big hats, right? And they go, Dr. Kim,
Wow.
your English is so good. Well, thank you. I was born here, raised here, went to all the same schools. But other than that, I've worked really hard.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
We Asians,
Well, you
our
are
work
Asian,
ethic.
that's right.
Let me tell you what.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I did the same thing when I saw Corey Ishida and Ben Shin yesterday talking, and I'm like, wow, their English is really good. For like old grandpas, man, their English is good. Anyway, all right, sorry, we're gonna I'll bring it back. We have a lot in common, right? You're both girl dads, which is kind of cool, right? We all love Korean women, apparently, so that's good too. But there's something about like being Asian. I don't think I'm alone in this, right? When I see you two, Julius I've known for a while, and we've just gotten to know each other. But from a distance, we're just very, just so proud, for lack of a better word, right? We see representation. We see someone who looks like me in these positions where we hadn't seen anyone before. And there's a part of me that, and again, I don't think I'm alone in this sentiment, you have to do well. You cannot fail, because it says something about me and my own identity if you don't do well. And if you do well, then it's sort of like Linsanity. We take pride, and maybe I could become like Jeremy Lin, which every parent says, oh yeah, you can go to Harvard too. So, but I guess my question is, do you feel that burden? And Harold Kim gave a great talk about Christ paid the price so you don't have to add to it. I get that. And yet when we're talking about mostly white spaces and an Asian American in these lead roles, do you feel that? And maybe have people said anything to you? Words of encouragement? Maybe we'll just go with that. Yeah.
You've been doing it longer than I have.
Yeah, I've certainly gotten words of encouragement. Actually, for me, it's been more just being a leader of color. So when I took my role in 2016, short answer is I don't feel that burden so much. I'll explain why. When I took my role in 2016, some were saying, in terms of a large organization, evangelical organization, I was the first leader of color, or president of color. So I had Black, Latino, I got it from everybody in terms of leader of color. And the interesting thing was, in our own organization for InterVarsity, we had a press release ready. We were working with Christianity Today. They wanted to do a piece. And what we were working on with them, what we had initially submitted was, I'm the first internally chosen president. It was a big deal for us that most of our presidents of InterVarsity come from the outside. So, we had an SPU, Seattle Pacific Dean was my predecessor. A pastor from Seattle was his predecessor. I mean, we've had external people. So we had this article like, oh, Tom's like homegrown. I was a campus missionary at some point, and now I'm the president. It was like a big deal to them. And Christianity Today changed the whole article. I mean, it was basically, so the article was like, leader of color. They made it all about ethnicity, right? So we found that interesting, and I think it was an awareness, though, that people look at this differently. you know. And it was almost like eye-opening that, oh yeah, actually this is a big deal to other people for other reasons than what I might think, right? The reason for me, probably I don't, and some of you maybe identify with this, maybe not. I mean, if you, I've been working white spaces for a long time though. So you know, when I was the first Urbana director that was a person of color. Okay. So people made a smaller deal of it then, but that was a deal, right? Or other spaces that I was in, and so I think it's not like a jump, like some people view it like suddenly, and I think same thing happens to NBA stars. I mean, well, Insanity maybe is a little different, but generally like they're known at some level. They face, you know, they're representing, and then they're representing more, right. And then they're representing even more, right? So it's not like a jump. So I think so that's one thing that I feel like is different, that it's always been that way, right? Is one way to put it. But I think the more important thing here, I was telling somebody who asked a question to me after the session this morning, it has to do with calling as well. So my calling from the Lord, some have the calling to advocate and represent for their community. That's a wonderful calling. That's not my particular calling. So I go in with an awareness that people do expect me to represent or whatever, but my calling is actually to lead this multi-ethnic organization that's reaching college students on campus. It's not, my calling is not to represent. I hope I do a good job of representing, but that's not my calling, right? So that's why I don't feel that burden so much. But you can pray for me, because, you know, I do know that others may place that on me, so.
Yeah, I don't feel that burden as well. I think very similar to Tom. I don't feel in taking this role I'm representing Asian Americans per se. I really feel at this stage in my life, I just want to do a good job and not screw up, you know? Whether I'm white or
That's my daily
you know,
prayer
yeah.
for you, yes.
Thank you. I mean, all my good friends just keep telling me, just don't jack it up. And that's pretty simple. But I am aware that as a person of color, I am I'm seen in that way. So, but at the end of the day, it's not, I want to be faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ. That's it. Yeah. And hopefully in doing so, I'm showing my wife and my children first that they can be proud of their husband and their father. And I think if I can do that, I'm okay. Yeah. But I'm also a pastor of the church. You know, I want to be faithful. I want to be a faithful pastor. And so I take that role as a kind of spiritual husband, father, as a pastor of a local church, and I take that kind of identity to my work at TGC. You know, I'm the president, but I just want to be a good husband, a good father, and a good pastor to my staff and to my constituency. So I think that's the way I look at it. And then secondarily, or maybe, you know, if because I'm a person of color, I'm also representing them, I hope I do well. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I should say that there's a way in which naturally we can advocate. It's not our primary calling or mission. It's not my primary calling or mission, but we bring our networks to our work. We bring the people we know, and you know, I'm in circles where every time people always ask me, do you know any trustees, potential board members of color? And I can give them my Rolodex. Because of where I am. So there are opportunities like that where I can, in a way, advocate. I don't feel like my job is to represent, but we do bring who we are. We do have those opportunities, and if it can help people of color and help some of our communities, and it's appropriate, I'll certainly do it. So,
yeah, let me piggyback on that too. I mean, one of the main reasons why I'm in this role is because Don Carson and Tim Keller wanted a person of color in leadership. And so I know that that's part of our DNA, that Tim really has a heart to raise a generation of leaders that don't look like him. And give them opportunities when they were never given before. Because in his position of power and influence, he knows that he's able to do things that other people cannot. And to elevate people of color that we cannot. Yeah. And so I recognize that, and I appreciate that. I want to honor that. Yeah. So even in my leadership, you know, I'm always looking around going, how many people of color are on my senior team? What's the gender makeup, you know? And so we're looking for a new director of events. We're looking for a new director. And my vice president was asking me, here are some candidates. And I said, I would love a person of color, and I love a female. Yeah. Because now I have that opportunity to make that DNA kind of grow and keep continuing. So, yeah.
Because we can't underestimate the significance of being in a leadership position and being intentional about that. I mean, that's, I think, what we're talking about is it's not race neutral, right? But we recognize that race is a part of it. That may not be everything. And so I think that's what you're speaking to. And Tom, I think what you're referring to is similar to, I know Julius's story a little better. You've been the first Asian something for a while, right? Years ago, it was, the first Korean American who's a professor at Westminster, right? And a first and a first and a first. I think that probably says more about the state of diversity and awareness in American evangelicalism, that we still are celebrating firsts. And we want to get to a point where, like, how do I say this nicely? The next Asian American who becomes whatever of something, we're like, oh yeah, that's good. It's becoming more normalized. I think we're headed there. But Julius, as you're talking about Don and Tim's intentionality of wanting a person of color in this role, some people will hear that and say, it sounds like a diversity hire, right? Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that. So can you elaborate more? And Tom, I'd love to get your take on that.
Well, you're the diversity expert.
Well, but I'm asking the question. So.
I don't feel qualified to answer that.
I will correct you if you're.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would say it is, just because you're looking for a person of color doesn't mean you're also not looking at qualifications and competency, right? And so for us, if you look at first thing I look for when you're hiring is not just competence, but actually character, right? Does this person have the integrity of the gospel, the humility of the gospel, the unity that breeds? So character is really important, right? But then also competency, like for this particular job, do they actually have the skill set and the ability? So it's not like we're overlooking that when we're also looking at color.
That's good.
But color is another variable that's very important in light of our current time and space. And so we would be ignorant and arrogant to somehow think that we don't look at color at all.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think you look at character, competency, and color because of where we are in America today.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think if you're intentional, and I think I don't view it as a negative or a bad thing if they say we want a diversity hire. I think actually what they're basically saying is let's not fish in the same pools. Yes, let's not assume that if I'm white and I'm not intentional, I'm just gonna naturally not like because it's a bad. I draw from my own networks. But with that intentionality, you force those processes to look at actually maybe there's people we don't know, and there are a lot of people you don't know, and so then you start drawing. So I view it as positive. I think and in my case. I was telling you yesterday, it's about the pool, so the pool you draw from, like the candidate pool for certain roles. And so I think I was probably a diversity hire earlier in my career because our organization was trying to be intentional about developing younger leaders. So you put leaders in certain roles, you give them certain opportunities because you want to develop them. I think that's really crucial to then developing a pool. So some people are like, well, why can't we have more presidents of people of color or whatever? Well, the problem is not that people aren't trying to select them, it's that they're not in the pool. So do they have the credentials, experiences, competencies gained over the years? Has someone invested in them so that they're ready to lead at that level? And so I do think that it's important, and I've gotten those opportunities. When I was younger in my life, somebody took a risk and said, hey, why don't you lead this 5-state region? You're 32 years old, or whatever, and you're 32 years old and you're going to teach, right? Someone took a risk. And I appreciated it because it gave me a chance to see, could I do it? And I think that's what we do need to see more of.
That's good. Yeah. That's really good. This is feeling more and more like red table talk. I like this. This is yellow table talk, though. we should keep doing this. All right, I'm going to go a little bit deeper here. So, last couple years, we've got anti-Asian hate. Lots going on. Some very, very painful, prominent moments in our history, modern history. What, if anything, did your institution do, and how was it received? Positive and maybe negative. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll start with a organizational posture or policy we have towards these things, because one of the challenges in a ministry like ours is, so I'll get to the Stop Asian Hate, but generally, every week there's some advocacy thing that we're being asked to support or endorse or talk about or say. you know. And if you say nothing, that's saying something, right? And so that's the challenge, right? And so we have a posture where we don't say anything, address anything, make any statement unless it directly impacts our campus missionary field. So if it's a shooting on a campus, then we'll potentially talk about it. If college students were affected, we'll potentially talk about it. If you remember many years ago at UVA, University of Virginia, there was a white supremacist march on the rally. We came out with an article because it touched the campus. There are some exceptions, like maybe every 3 or 4 years there'll be an exception. George Floyd's killing, I did write a piece that came out in solidarity with our black brothers and sisters. That's unique, but it's at that level of unique. And it's important because as church pastors, you can't talk about everything. So if you don't already have a guiding document or a policy on what you talk about, what you don't talk about, I highly suggest it. It will save you a lot of hassle later on. So Stop Asian Hate, when it came, it actually initially did not fit any of our parameters. And I already went on the record speaking a lot in solidarity with my black brothers and sisters. And this is one of the challenges as an Asian American leading a multi-ethnic organization. I don't want to be that Asian person who only talks about Asian things, right? So I did use my voice to advocate for our black brothers and sisters, and it was a tough call on the Stop Asian Hate. What should I say? And as you know, like I'm not just because I'm an Asian leader of an organization, I'm not an Asian expert. But everyone assumes I am, right? You know what I mean? Like everyone's probably asking Jeremy Lin, hey, what do you think about Stop Asian Hate? Yeah. I mean, he's a basketball player, right? What does he know about, right? You know, but they assume, right? And so actually I did, I was asked by Christianity Today and some others, like, do you want to talk about this? Do you want to, and I actually declined those. So those are a little hard, but because my stance was, first, it didn't fit in our parameters of what our organization is mainly focused on, and then also, I frankly didn't feel like I was the best person. So actually, I gave them other names. I'm like, that's great, you want to talk about it. Why don't you want to talk about me? Like, there's some other people who could speak much better to this. So as the organizational leader, I didn't make a statement on that one. I did call our Asian American ministry director. I did internally because people were hurting. Yeah. And then I will say our Asian American ministry, I had it done at a lower level. They did join some coalitions, sign some things or whatnot, and that was fine with us. But we didn't, at an organizational level, do something else. And that was a difficult decision.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think our organization is a little bit different because we actually believe that the gospel applies to all of life. That's actually one of our taglines. So there's no topic that we cannot talk about through the lens of the gospel. But that doesn't mean we're going to talk about everything in the same way. Does that make sense? We have to prioritize what we say and then proportion our energies and time to talk about that. On this particular issue, I was actually existentially torn because on a personal level, I was really battling in my own mind as the husband of an Asian woman and as the father of 2 Asian girls who walked one of them who walked the campus of Berkeley and is scared, who walked through the streets of San Francisco and is scared. So when you have a daughter calling you and saying, Daddy, what do I do? I'm scared. Then it becomes real. Does that make sense? And so like, okay, now how do I use my platform to help other people understand this? And like Tom, I said, I don't know. I'm not an expert. So I know I had to speak about it, but then I knew I had to get other people to speak first. So I talked to my editors and said, who are some of the Asian women that we know that can speak to this? And so we talked to Sujin. And Sujin wrote a piece, a beautiful piece.
It was really good.
Beautiful piece. Because I need to listen to other people who have different perspectives that I just don't know. So I needed to listen to my daughter, listen to my wife, listen to Sujin and others, and let them speak to it first. And then I wrote a piece. About it. And then I was really scared of the impact it would have. So what did I do? I called my friends, Alex and Owen and Harold, and I said, guys, is this okay? And as you can imagine, they're like, yes and no. Angry Owen said, you need to say more. Right? And academic Alex is...
What'd I say?
He's like, well, you should say this, that. Then he gave me like 5 other sub-points. I'm like, bro, I have a 1,000-word limit, right? And Harold is like, you're doing great. Go, Julius, go. So I have great friends. And so, no, in all honesty, we got on a Zoom call. I don't know if you guys remember that Zoom call, right? And we were broken. And we were crying. This is happening to our community. These are our aunts and uncles, and these are our people. And so it became very personal, but I didn't want the personal to to over-influence the professional duties that we have as an organization. So we felt like those pieces, that's what we can do. We can't do it all, and we try not to sign statements generally. We say that's not our lane. That's not the way we advocate. We exist to support the local church in making disciples of all nations, right? By providing gospel-centered resources that are trusted and timely, winsome and wise. So that's what we do. We don't write statements of faith, so to speak. And so we provide content ultimately to help church leaders have the conversation. And so we have voices that can help us think through this, like an Alex Jun or a Sujin. So that's what we did, and what was the response? As you can imagine, I got it all, right? I got I'm so thankful. Thank you for speaking to this. And then I got I can't believe you're using your platform as an Asian to only talk about Asian stuff. And I said, we've been around for 15 years, and this is, I think, the first time we've had an article, like, literally, about Asian American, like, 1 article, 2 articles, 3, really. But, social justice warriors, cultural Marxist, I got it all. From internally. Externally, I don't care about internet trolls, right? I do a little bit. I'm a people pleaser, so I do care a little bit about the internet trolls that are really creative, by the way, on social media. Man, they are like really creatively evil. But at the same time, when it's internal, then it becomes really hard. So it just prompted a lot of conversations. And my posture has always been, like you said, my posture is, let me listen. Let me listen and learn. And then in as much as I'm listening and learning, I can still then leverage this opportunity to, at least let's have the conversation. You don't have to agree with me or this article or that article, but let's have the conversation. And that's why one of the things we're trying to do at TGC is this, I don't know if you saw online, the good faith debates. Mm-hmm. We're just not talking together as Christians. And so let's talk. We can differ, but let's do it with love, right? So let's listen and love and do what we can.
I realize the leadership burden for both of you and probably everyone here is the expectations for people for always saying, you didn't do enough. And then the other people, hey, you did too much. Yeah, and so especially as it concerns Asian American issues, I think you'll feel the burden from your Asian American base to say, come on, you can't just, don't buy into this whole, come on, stop code shifting. Keep it real with us. Yeah, that's hard, All right, Julius, you had mentioned something about your role with the organization and the church, how you can better serve the church. We have a room full of people who are local church ministers and servants. Tell us a little bit about the role of the parachurch and how you connect with the local church, because this is what both of you are doing, and God's blessing the ministries, but we're not all in parachurches. So can you talk a little about the parachurch and a little about the connection with the local church?
Well, we have, I'm glad to, we have probably little different types of parachurch organizations for sure. I think for us, I'll share a little bit of how kind of philosophically I see the partnership, and then practically how we can partner better together. I think that's often a question I get. Philosophically, we, as a parachurch ministry, we actually view that time in college as a significant time where students can both come to faith. So we're dealing with a lot of non-believers, non-church people, right? So in fact, some of our chapters, more than half of the people at the beginning of the year are non-Christian, right? So it's not just we're trying to gather church people, we're gathering people who are unchurched, right? And so I think that's a significant, in the church folks that we do have, we want them to see their 4 years in college, if they're an undergrad in a 4-year school, as a mission field. Like, actually, we want them to see themselves as missionaries in a time where they're going to develop and grow as ministers of the gospel. So we train them, develop them, and we want to see them. And our hope is that during those 4 years, we'll train them and develop them so that when they graduate, they can be sent out to the local churches around the country and vocations and wherever they are, and keep ministering the gospel wherever they're at. That's our hope. And so we only get them for those 4 years, right? So when we talk about partnering with churches, our hope is for some churches, will churches come alongside and support them as missionaries? Right. Sometimes we see, I was talking about the competition thing. No, like, we actually want more of their time. Or, and so it becomes a competitive thing when actually what students need more than ever is actually churches that support them and welcome them and love on them. Amen. That's what they need the most, right? And so, so I had just a great, the best churches I see around the country that do this are, they go to our student leaders to just say, hey, you know, we know that you're serving on campus, you're blessing a lot of students, you're sharing the gospel. We want this place to be a home for you. So whatever we can do to bless you, don't feel like you're burdened that you need to do X, Y, and Z in our church. We just want to bless you. Those are the best churches for those students often. Now, having said that, we do want to, what we work on, which is not easy, is the church-going habit, right? For every Gen Z student right now, that's a challenge. COVID's not making it easier. That's made it harder, right? So when students go far off in college and try to get started in a new church, that church-going habit is very important for us. So we do try to do some things where students go with other students to local churches, and they typically go to a variety of churches. So it's kind of a, you know, here's 10 churches, 10 people go to these 10 different churches, go with them, and within like 4 or 5 weeks, we encourage you, pick one, you know, don't hop around the rest of the time. So that's what we do, and sometimes it works out well, sometimes it's still hard, because that church-going habit is such a crucial element, and it doesn't always work at the same. So we're still learning, we're still growing in that.
Yeah, I think TGC, when it started as an organization of a coalition of pastors. And so in its very beginning stages, they wanted to recognize that TGC ultimately exists for the sake of the local church, and they're represented by the Council of Pastors. And so TGC has a council of about 45 pastors and leaders that represent their local churches, et cetera. And so we gather together once a year. At least structurally, we have opportunities to talk about what are the issues that you're facing in your local church. And then based on those issues, how can we then band together to provide resources back to the local church, knowing that we can't do this alone. And that's the beauty of the community that you talked about, right? That actually, as leaders come together, I was like, there are things that I can't do, so I need Alex's help or I need Tom's help. But unless we actually intentionally provide spaces for that to happen, we won't work together. So that's one of my real goals, is just bring together pastors to talk about their issues. What are the issues that you're facing? Then now, how do we find some solutions together? And so that's what we're trying to do. So we do that intentionally with not only our council, but we have regional chapters. We have 25 regional chapters around the country. We have almost 19 international chapters as well. So this is basically just coalitions of pastors talking together. And now what we want to do is think more globally about it. Think globally, but act locally, right? And so because we can learn from everywhere now, not just from Missouri, but also from Mongolia. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And we need more of that, I think.
That's good. Yeah. I think we pronounce it misery. Anyway, okay. Yeah, it's collaboration, not competition. I keep hearing that theme. It's really, really encouraging. Yeah. All right, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a question about leadership, right? So I think I'll just cut to the chase and say, how do you make sure you avoid ministry pitfalls and failings? What's your personal practice?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's something that I would encourage everyone. We should all be asking each other. Yeah. It's a great question. I have a few things I think that, and I'll just say it's also harder generally for Gen Xers. Okay, those of you Gen Xers here? So we were talking about that a little bit earlier yesterday. I was a Gen Xer who I grew up as a latchkey kid. So, I was home by myself, whatever, and I rebelled against authority and want to do everything myself. I'll figure it out. Don't give me a cookie cutter solution. I'll just do it myself. And I wasn't into mentoring, whatever. Very different from the millennials and Gen Z who they crave mentors, generally want mentors. It's a thing, right? Mentors, mentoring. Boomers and millennials get along really with their mentoring, right? Relationships or whatnot. For me, I didn't have that kind of relationship for probably my first 10 years in ministry. I had supervisors, I had people who probably were leading me, but I wouldn't call it mentoring relationships. It wasn't until I got into more different levels of leadership that I realized this could potentially be a problem down the line. And so I did two things. One, I got my own mentor. Is Leighton Ford of Leighton Ford Ministries, and so I talk to him several times a year, and I see him on a retreat each year. That's something that I blocked in to my time, and so that's a person that kind of helps oversee. We check in on the high level issues of life, and then I started an accountability group of about 10 years ago. other organizational leaders. I was looking for organizational leaders who travel a lot, who feel isolated, and who have kids at home. Okay? And you'd be surprised. There's a good number of them out there. Okay? So I called a bunch of people. They were friends of mine, different folks. Actually, David Platt was one of them. I was asking him as well. Eugene Cho, some of you may know him in Seattle, and a bunch of others. And in the end, we ended up with a group of about 8 guys. Okay? And we gathered together for a retreat every year. And then we have a texting group, and we call ourselves the Eulogists. It's kind of a morbid name, I know, because we call ourselves the Eulogists because our hope is through our friendships and how we know each other, that one day when the time comes for us to go, we will eulogize each other at our memorials, right? That's the kind of friendship and community that we want. So with this group of guys, they understand, it's sort of, I can, like, the classic example is, I forgot to tell my wife I have a trip this week, and it's bad, and then start, oh, sorry, brother, I told you, and it's we get each other, the dynamics of what we're trying to balance each day, and can challenge each other as well. We share each other's biggest challenges, and so I think that's been a discipline to have that. So getting these kinds of things in place as well have been crucial to maintain. And then, of course, organizationally, I have the privilege of being part of a large organization. So I've got a board of trustees, I've got protocols, I've got financial management. There's 3 other people that sign checks or whatever. So there's a lot of accountability that, and because I'm part of a large organization, I realize the challenges with smaller organizations. Nobody knows what the leader's really doing, half the time. But I do have a board of trustees that's really helpful, and other things. But I think the personal accountability, setting that up intentionally, has been really crucial for me the last 10 years.
That's really good. And I'm not going to repeat what he said, because the idea of holy friendships is so important. I would not be where I am today without my best friend, my wife, and her accountability, as well as my good friends. And we meet regularly, not only in person, but also on Zoom regularly, just talk through life. And we don't have an agenda. We just say, how are you doing? What's the Lord doing in your life, and how can we be praying for you? So we have that same kind of friendship, and Alex, of course, and Owen is in that group, and have been for 30 years. And I can't even imagine doing what I'm doing now without my wife and my friends. So just think about that. For those of you that are younger and just don't have that yet, think very intentionally about leaving this conference and saying, who are the 3 or 4 others in my life that I can contact and say, we need to become, I want them to be my pallbearers, right? These are the guys that are going to carry my coffin, right? Who are going to be my pallbearers, who will love Jesus more than they love me. That if I do something wrong to the witness of Christ, that they're the ones that are going to call my church, my presbytery, and strip me of my credentials, get me out of my job, etc. They're the ones, because they love Jesus more than they love me. So those are the kinds of people you need. But I'm just going to talk a little bit more about some spiritual practice. One of the things that I do that helps me is I read this little book by Henri Nouwen called In the Name of Jesus. Now, he's a Catholic mystic, so you have to read him carefully. But there's so much wisdom there. And he just, every time I've read that book for the last 20 years. Every year I read that book. And you can read it in one sitting, but it moves me so much every time I read it. I actually have to stand because I'm just so troubled by what he's saying, right? He talks about Jesus' 3 temptations, right? The temptations of relevance, popularity, and influence. And I think in our roles, we're always going to be tempted in that way. Relevance, popularity, and influence. Those are the temptations Jesus faced when he was on that desert for 40 days. And so then Henri Nouwen walks through, then what are the spiritual disciplines that you need to do to offset that? And one is the spiritual discipline of prayer. And it's not easy, but somehow, whether it's individual or corporate, you got to be involved in prayer. Second is vulnerability. Is being vulnerable with others and saying, I am really struggling. Vulnerability. And then last is just trust. That's faith, right? Trusting that the Lord has brought you to this point in your life and that he has the resources to give you by his grace because of his Son to get you through that. There's no temptation that has come on you that you cannot bear, but you can stand under it. So all that to say, just that little book just reminds me again and again, because he was an academic before. He understood, that temptation to relevance, popularity and influence. And he just said, you know what? For my own heart and for my own soul and for the sake of Christ, I'm going to leave that. And he goes to minister to disabled, And so it's a beautiful reminder every year for me, of what I'm doing and why. And so those kind of spiritual disciplines for me has been really helpful, in addition to the friendships, right, which are really important, that community, et cetera. So those are just good reminder for me.
I read Nouwen's book, In the Name of Jesus. I just read it once. And the Lord used that to have me leave the University of Southern California to go to a Christian university and work. Yeah. I should have never read that book.
This Catholic mystic wrecks all of us.
Absolutely wrecked. I mean, it was like your
I
message,
think
right?
Return of the Prodigal Son, Henry Nouwen's Return of the Prodigal Son, that's an Asian American passage right there. You look at that whole story and his painting, that's like Asian American painting right there, So
good. Yeah. All right. We had a few questions here, but this is get a little bit maybe complicated. Is there a question you were hoping we'd never get asked? And why? You don't have to explain in detail, but what's one question? God, I hope he doesn't ask this. I'll start.
That's right. You're just setting yourself up.
Ask and answer, ask and answer. That's right. This is just like my class. Okay. These days, it's let's not talk about Christian nationalism. Let's not talk about Christian nationalism because it's just too, I get into too much trouble and I get too fired up for it because it's so painful. But for me, that would be please let's not talk about that today. Tomorrow, maybe. But not today.
Well, one difficult issue that I get asked about a lot, and I wouldn't mind talking about it, but I'm tired of talking about it, is in the area of human sexuality. So theology of human sexuality, what's going on with college today? What are you doing about Sochi? How do we reach this generation? What's going on? It's important.
Yeah.
And I get asked about it a lot.
And it's exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is an important issue.
Yeah, those are all good. Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head, but yeah, Christian nationalism is something that we also talk about a lot at TGC, sexuality issues, and then of course race. Race is one of those things that it's complex. And I think a lot of people think it's a simple solution. Either you don't talk about it at all, or that's the only thing you talk about. And again, important, really important for us to have that conversation because the gospel touches that, I believe. But it's just been really,
Woke church, CRT.
Yeah, those are hard. And we need to have those conversations, but yeah, that's a tough one.
What? Could I flip it and say one thing I like to talk about? So one of the things, because you triggered it when you were, I forgot, one thing you were just sharing just reminded me. I do think something that I hope we talk about more is the global church, is the majority world church. I think sometimes I strongly believe an answer to a lot of our problems in the church today and evangelicalism in the U.S. today, the answer will come from the majority world church. And so we need to hear those stories. We need to tell those stories. It's the faith of those Nigerian believers I shared, or those in Asia, Africa, Latin America. Those are the stories that we need to hear because they faced a lot of what we're facing here. They face much worse political issues than we have. They face a lot of issues much worse than we have. And so how can we hear their voices? How can we raise their voices? They're going to provide a lot of the answers that we're looking for. So anyways, my thing.
Real good. Yeah, obviously. Completely agree. I'll just add one more topic. One of the things I'm really tired of talking about is what does complementarity mean? Honestly. I'm at the point where come on, really? And I'm a complementarian, right? But we talk so much about what women cannot do. We don't spend nearly enough time about what women can do. And so we at TGC were come on. That's one of the things about being at a parachurch. I don't get as much trouble. And is this recorded? You know what? Who cares?
Hey, no one's going to listen.
Really,
it's okay.
who cares?
It's going on Twitter next hour.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, come on, what we talked about yesterday, I would not be here without the wisdom of the women in my life. My mom, my grandma, my wife, and my 2 daughters. I am here because of these women. And I would not be able to do what I do without their wisdom, knowledge, understanding, skill, experience, gifting. So they talk to me all the time. They lead my life all the time. right? And that's okay. There's a way to be mutually submissive to one another, right? So why can't we do that in our churches in a more beautiful, powerful way? So I just feel like one of the things we're doing at TGC, two of the major initiatives that we're going to be launching is our global networks and our women's initiatives. Awesome. We want to invest more in there. Yeah. And it's not because, that doesn't mean we're going to produce another article on complementarianism. We're just going to do the work and support the church.
All right. Yeah. Calm down. You'll be all right.
Sorry.
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. No, the global church piece is fascinating because the immigrant church, right? This is the whole piece about how immigrants understand this is not our home, earthly and heavenly, right? It's a good reminder. And not that I'm going to plug any one particular group, but I know Hannah Nation has a book with the China Partnership, and they're talking about the suffering church. And it's not here in North America, it's in China. Yeah. And where are we going to learn about suffering and perseverance of our faith? It's going to be people who suffered and persevered for their faith, right? I listened to someone gave a talk at a national conference, and he talked about perseverance, and he gave the example of football in fourth quarter. And I'm like, that's all you got? You preach from where you're coming from. So I'm like, but that's all you got. Wow, that's perseverance. Yeah, the game ends. Anyway, so yeah, no, that's really good. All right. We have a couple of minutes left, and I wouldn't want to miss this opportunity just to give you an opportunity to share to this group, maybe some final words of encouragement as we leave this conference, as we move forward in their own leadership roles and capacities. So, yeah, give it a second and think.
Just a word of encouragement. I mean, I think, as I was alluding to, I made light of it in terms of the network leader, whatever. Like you all serving in the churches that you're in, where God has led you. You're working in the trenches. Sometimes you're getting criticized. You're bearing pain. I know it's not easy, but keep on. If the Lord has led you there, if the Lord has called you to this work, I want to encourage you. It's worth it in the end. It's kind of like what you were sharing about generations later. People will stand before you, and you'll be in awe of what God's done in their lives as a result is through the ministry that you've been a part of, that you've been able to be privileged to be a part of and to serve in. It's worth it. It is worth it. It is worth it. The grass always looks greener on the church over there. Well, they look like they don't have as many problems. Oh, they got problems, but you just don't know about them, right? So the Lord has you where you're at for a reason, and may you be faithful in it. And I want to encourage you, it's totally worth it. So keep on.
Yeah, it's a good word. I'll share. That's for encouragement. Let me offer an exhortation then. I think more than ever before, the Christian church is going to be challenged to compromise more and more. And I feel like we're entering into a period as Christianity becomes more and more marginalized and the culture becomes more hostile to Christianity. We're going to be asked to do two things. We're going to be asked do you really believe what you believe? And I believe we're going to be asked to be able to confess with our lives what we believe. So we need to maintain our integrity of what you believe and not compromise. And so maintain your integrity in the gospel. That's true, and we're willing to die for it. And so I think you need to maintain your integrity in what the scriptures teach about the gospel. And secondly, while you're asked about your convictions and maintaining your integrity, you have to always have a posture of humility. I think more and more leaders are unwilling to die to themselves. We're unwilling to die to our wives, our husbands. We're unwilling to die to our supervisors. We're unwilling to die to the world. I think Christ is calling us more than ever before to a life of dying. And then, when you thought you died, die again. Honestly, that's our ministry. Proclaim Christ in your words and in your deeds. And then just die. Will you just die? And then be forgotten. It's okay. You don't need to be relevant. You don't need to be influential. You don't need all that. We just want to be faithful. Amen. Faithful to what Christ has already said. Be a good spokesperson for the Lord. Maintain your integrity. But then do it in the posture of Christ. And die to yourself. So just integrity, humility, I think for the sake of Christ, that would be my exhortation to you all.
So good. And on that note, Julius, Tom, thank you. Let's thank them.